Hello and welcome to My Favorite Games, a podcast for game designers to geek out about games they like to play. Today, I'm super excited to host Shawn Hoult. Shawn has been designing games for 3-ish years and has been YouTubing about games for 4 years. He hosts Allies or Enemies with his lovely wife Jess, and the first game he will be releasing is called Last Week of Summer, which I'm really interested to dig into in just a couple of minutes. But Shawn, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be chit-chatting.
So before we get into your background and Last Week of Summer, the game that you brought to today to the figurative desert island is GaiaProject. Tell me about it. What is it, and why do you like it so much?
Yeah, and I put some thought into this. We were so close to chatting about Draftosaurus, I'll tell you, and then we ended up talking about GaiaProject, so I am almost 50-50 on these two right now. But GaiaProject it's part of a trilogy of games with Terra Mystica and Age of Innovation. It's the one right in the middle, and it's Helge Ostertag and Jens Drogmuller. And I'm just reading that off the box right now. I've not memorized any of this stuff.
Of course,
But
you
you're in outer space. You're one of a whole bunch of different alien races. There's like 20-ish, something like that in there. And you're doing Eurogamey things. So you're trading resources back and forth. You're building houses out on these planets. You're creating reach for different planets for your like solar empire. You're moving up a bunch of tracks that give you different bonuses. And you're just managing resources, but in like a really tight, really fun way. And it's unbelievably tight. This game is so like if you screw up in the first round, you're having a bad day for the rest of the game because people are just gonna like kind of tear ahead of you. But it's really fun. I kind of enjoy how it is a little bit unforgiving. And I really like that resource management. Like I think most board games are math dressed up like fun, and it's not even dressed up like that well, but it's the math is so fun, it's just a great game, and you can keep going back to it because of all those different asymmetric races that play pretty differently. So every time I play it, it feels a little different. And Jess and I keep a spreadsheet of all of the different ones we've been. So we're making sure to play with we don't have a favorite because we make sure that we beat each different one. And then we kind of keep track. Oh, how did I do with this one versus how did you do with that one? Sort of thing in this one.
So when you're using the word tight, right?
Mm-hmm.
In terms of how all of the different elements work together in terms of the mechanics, and is it the mechanics that like get you going, or is it the theme, or is it both? Is it the fact that both of them have been kind of married in an elegant way?
It's mostly the mechanics here, which is interesting because I usually will be drawn into games due to theme. That's usually the way with me. It's a little bit theme. I love spacey stuff, and that's part of the reason I prefer this one to Terra Mystica and Age of Innovation. Is those are both more of a fantasy theme, and this is a space theme. And this one just works better at two players, which is primarily what Jess and I play. So it is a little bit the theme, but it's mostly the mechanics. Because I'm also perfectly happy to play Terra Mystica or Age of Innovation, or if you just took this exact same game and made it about like raccoons, I would like that even more. I hope that they do that.
Because you like
But
raccoons.
yeah, but you could take this and make it about an awful lot of different things, and I think I would be pretty much equally interested in it. So this game's really, really mechanically sound, and that is really what draws me into it.
So oftentimes when you're, or at least when I talk to different game designers, they are quite conscious in, or a certain type of game designer is quite conscious in trying to make an experience that is not necessarily accessible in terms of easy, but accessible in terms of inclusive to the people who are playing the game. And sometimes that results in having a rubber band effect of, are there ways that you can get the different players to make up ground or lose ground to try
Right.
and keep everybody on the even track. It sounds like that isn't necessarily present in GaiaProject. Maybe as much. Is that fair?
It's there a little bit. So if you end a round early, so whoever's first to stop that round, and you can kind of keep playing indefinitely. Really, you can't really because you'll run out of stuff. You're spending like your white hexagons are getting you things, and then your blue circles are getting you things. Those are like your resources. Your money is one of the things. But those are getting you things, and as you spend those are dwindling. Once those are gone, your round's done. But whoever is done that round first probably had the worst round, but they get the first pick of these like bonuses that you're going to get to use in the next round. So they get that, and they get to go first, which can be a bit of a plus. But this isn't really the sort of game that kind of like holds your hand. Like I do appreciate those catch up mechanics in a lot of games, but I don't know if every game has to have it. And this one is definitely one that's like, yeah, you're gonna have a tough day, and then you're gonna learn from it, and then you're gonna have a better day tomorrow. I think is the catch up mechanic here.
But do you think that that's one of the reasons why it is such a tight game? In that way that it's making a conscious decision for to not make it too easy for someone who has screwed up to recover.
Uh, I don't know because I might be misrepresenting it a little bit there. I don't know if it's so hard, but it definitely doesn't like build you all the way back up. So yeah, it probably is kind of one of the selling points. Is it's one of those games, and I think this is in a lot of the heavier Euro games, where there is a little bit of kind of experience and expertise that the game wants you to have, and I think the players who are into some of those sorts of games are fine with that. Like are fine with, you know what, I'm going to learn some stuff. It's not the sort of game that you're going to play at like your family game night with someone who's, only playing like 3 games a year. Like they're not going to have a good time. This is not for that crowd. So I think it can kind of cater to a slightly different audience, but I totally think that those sorts of catch-up mechanics, that sort of rubber band, if you're playing that like casual game night with your friends who don't play a lot of games, you're trying to get them into it, that stuff is so important and it's so useful. In this, I guess the catch-up mechanics, when Justin and I have played Terra Mystica with friends, is if we're getting too far ahead, we're just like, well, let's lay off the gas. We just kind of look at each other like, you know what? Let's make sure everyone's having fun at the table here, which I think is important too. And there's also the someone gets out ahead, people are going to try and kind of pile up on that person, and that's always that built-in catch-up mechanic.
So has GaiaProject, whether it's the maybe not as much the theme, but the mechanics influenced how like has it directly influenced how you look at game design?
Yeah, I think a couple things in it have. I think one of them is just the integrated systems, like how everything's kind of tied to everything. So, like, if I need this one resource, I've got 3 or 4 different ways that I can think about getting it. It's not closed off because someone did this thing that now makes it so I can't get whatever it is I want to get. I've got some other ways if I can kind of think laterally about it that I can still get to that end goal through some kind of creative wheeling and dealing, which makes me feel clever in the game within that system. So I think that's one of the things. I certainly have not done it nearly as well as GaiaProject, but that's one of the things that's always in my head of make sure that something isn't closed off because one person went to this one spot. And then the other thing is I love asymmetry in a game. It's one of my absolute favorite things. I love asymmetry. I love modules. I love that sort of thing. And this does that really well. Like even you've seen a lot of my designs that all have modular boards. I like can't not do that. And this is all modular boards. That's what you see in GaiaProject. And then just the asymmetric factions. I love that you can have a different experience with the same game like 20 different times. And even though you're coming back to the same game, you've got that base, like right from the start, it's going to feel so different. I really like that.
You've played games for a while, but you used to be a teacher,
Hmm.
uh, and you've worked in publishing. How did you get from that life to designing board games?
I think probably nowadays it's a very similar story to a lot of other people that the publisher I was working with during COVID downsized a lot. I find myself in the opportunity, let's say, with the opportunity to have a little bit more time than I had previously, and looking to pursue other stuff, and it really felt like the right time to dive fully into board games because it's always been an interest. Like I played games with my mom most days after school when I was a little kid. I played even like through all the way through school. It was always an interest for me. And then Jess and I have that's really been one of the things that really brought us together that we've really bonded over is how much we love board games, and that just built up a ton during the pandemic. It's all we were doing, right? We couldn't go outside, so we're just playing so many board games. That's what where the channel was born. Um, and then it was kind of percolating a little bit, like, oh, I want to make something. I think I could do this, and then that kind of was the opportunity. Like, all right, great. Now I got a little bit of time. Let's use that time. Let's really go into what I want to be doing.
And now that is literally what you're doing.
Yeah, yeah. This is now my time's pretty much split right now between the channel and trying to design games.
Trying to successfully designing games. First off, from a creator standpoint, allies or enemies is the channel. That also got started around that time, maybe about 4 years ago. Was that during COVID as well?
Yeah, yeah. That was the same sort of thing. That kind of came out of I always need to be making something, and there was not a lot of opportunity. I've done a lot of things on stage and writing and all that sort of thing, and those opportunities were kind of closed off to me. And Jess and I wanted to work on something together, and so we were like, let's do this. Like we'd both done a little bit with other YouTube things. We kind of had tried our hands at things a little bit separately, but not really. And then we were like, let's do this together. Let's really focus on this, and we really enjoyed working on it.
You started off as a channel, and you've obviously, as a channel that talks about board games and reviews board games, you have some interaction with publishers, I'd imagine, that want you to feature their games. How and maybe other game designers. How has that dynamic been affected by your kind of decision to want to design games yourself? Have you has that been at all weird, or has it opened up opportunities? Like,
Yeah, I've had a lot of good conversations with a lot of publishers. I pitched to a bunch of publishers. A lot of those turned into no's, but they've always been really positive no's, and they've always been really positive interactions. So it just really hasn't ever been like even close to an issue. Like it's nothing that I've worried about. That, and if you've seen our channel, we don't really review. Like we do, but we don't really like give a score. We're not giving like a 3 out of 10 or anything like that. There's a lot of terrific channels that do that, but it's not really what I've ever been comfortable in reviewing. Like I started reviewing music when I in like my 20s, and I reviewed my whole life, but I've always reviewed for publications that want you to more just talk about the thing and kind of find the audience for the thing. And so I always look at it like I don't know why it matters that much what I think about it. I just want to be like, this is what it is. These are some of the positives, some of the negatives I might see. So if you're into it, you're into it. If you're not into it, that's cool too. But like, here's what the thing is that you might be interested in. And because I think because we review like that, we don't really have a lot of worry about like, oh, are we going to be skewed one way or skewed the other way? Because we're really just trying to talk about it objectively, and that's where we started, and that's where we'll continue going.
yeah, and for those of you who haven't seen the channel, it's a very positive bit of energy in terms of helping you discover what might be up your street, and so I can totally see why that isn't necessarily a challenge. But when you're thinking about designing games and thinking about it from the marketing perspective, uh, is your experience receiving games to talk about also on your mind? Like, oh, these folks have actually done a pretty good job, or maybe not as great a job at positioning this game, or at articulating it, or at presenting it.
Yeah, you'd think it would be. Now that you asked that, I'm like, I should have had those thoughts.
Of
No,
course.
and actually, that had never crossed my mind. I really just looked at have I enjoyed games by this publisher? And are those games, is what I'm putting out reflective of kind of what they're like? Can I see it living within their ecosystem? And that's the only reason really I'm talking to them, is just purely, is the thing mechanically, creatively good? And do I want to talk to them? And like I say, I've talked to a lot of publishers. I've talked to a lot of publishers and a lot wearing a lot of different hats. Um, and it's always been a super positive interaction. But I will say that the other side of that too is that a lot of publishers have really been like, "Oh, we'd love to help you though." So there's always been that sort of like, you know what, this isn't a fit, but when we get this out, let us know. We'd love to, like, we'll give you any sort of information. We'll let you know kind of what we've messed up in the past with our journey through this. And we're more than happy to do that. And I've been really impressed by how many publishers have done that. And it's most of them, if not all of them.
So it's very heartening, but also a bit surprising to hear you say that, just from my background. So I come from like tech startups.
Mm.
And when I started going with with designing board games and trying to see what routes there were to trying to get the thing out, I had, I think, a whole bunch of preconceived notions based off of a completely different space. You know,
Mm-hmm.
I kind of came into this thinking, publishers are the VCs and you're the startup. And you can either, become such a smash hit that they want to do business with you, or you have to like justify yourself to them, or they're going to be the ones dictating everything that you're going to do and all this kind of stuff. So that's resulted in, I've never reached out to a publisher
Right.
about anything. And so like, not that you necessarily have experience talking through VCs, but the hearing that actually publishers do engage, they do provide actionable feedback rather than just a series of of no's, is a little interesting to be to be honest. Just because my assumptions have been that these folks probably see 1,000 pitches a day and they just don't have time for this stuff.
Right. Yeah, and I think that that makes sense because that is an awful lot of industries. Like I know in book publishing I don't think is nearly as cutthroat as the tech industry. So I think book publishing is probably a little closer to board game publishing, but still there it's a lot more standoffish, and I don't think you would get that same kind of engagement. But yeah, with game publishing, and it's obviously they get a lot of games, so it's not every time that you're going to get really excellent feedback because some publishers are, you're right, are getting thousands of games. So them just reaching back and saying no is them spending some time. But I can say that some of the no's I've had, some of the interactions I've had with publishers have really helped to make my games better just from their feedback, just from no, and I'll tell you why. Here are some of the things that we think could use a little bit of work, or we loved this, we didn't like this. And that has been some of the best feedback that I've had.
In terms of nuts and bolts, like how do you approach publishers? Do you just literally find them, find their details, and send them a cold email? Do you always go through the whatever process they say they have, on their website? How do you try and stand out? Do you focus on sell sheets? Like, are sell sheets really important to you?
Yeah, it's really just going through their process, like doing the thing that they asked me to do. I've been on the other side as a book publisher, and I only ever wanted people to do it's like we got a process for a reason. Don't try and go around our process. And so I really try to respect that. So I see, this is the way that they would like me to pitch. I will pitch exactly that way and give them exactly what that thing is. And for sub publishers, that's going to be a spreadsheet. For most publishers, the thing that's most important is actually a video. Most publishers really want a short 2-3 minute video that quickly tells them about the game. So I think that would be the core thing for people to hone. That would be my one big bit of advice if people really want to pitch games. Work a little bit on those sell sheets, but those sell videos, that is your bread and butter. So I think that is the thing that helped me get my foot in the door with a few folks, is just doing that. But I've never had a publisher come back to me and be like, "Oh yeah, I've seen your channel." I think they have no idea. I've never
Yeah,
had
yeah.
anyone have any idea, our channel is still fairly small, so have any idea who I was. That's never been an asset as
A
near
part
as
of
I
it. Yeah.
know. So
Yeah.
it's always just been, follow their path. They'll reach out and say, not for us, or okay, let's look at the next step. And then you've got, a lot of steps. Don't get too excited too early. That's the other thing too, because there are going to be a bunch of steps before you get to that finish line. Now I haven't got to that finish line with a publisher, so I don't know about that last step, but I can tell you that generally publishers are really good at laying that out and setting those expectations as well.
Cool. So speaking, we've talked around this for a while,
Right.
but last week of summer is the current game that you're working on. The next one you're going to be releasing. Tell me about it. What's it about? Obviously, with a name like that, it sparks a lot of curiosity. But yeah, what's it about? What do you do?
Yeah, so last week of summer, and I should just set this up as well that, we're talking about having games rejected and stuff. Last week of summer isn't something that I pitched very much. So I've got a bunch of designs, and my intention was always I'm going to put out a lot of these myself. But I would kind of like to work with a publisher to go through the process as well on a couple of games. So I've got some other games that I've been pitching. So anyone who's interested in this game, don't worry, it hasn't been rejected by everyone. This is one I kind of held to myself. I've held this close to my heart. But last week of summer is a game about it's 1986. You've got 1 week left of summer. You've just finished high school. You got 1 week left of summer to squeeze as much fun out of it as you possibly can before you've got to go off to, university or go work in your uncle's furniture factory or whatever it is you've got to do as an adult. And so you're trying to get as much fun as you can. And the game it's kind of term programming, it's kind of worker placement. And we're talking about the modularity in GaiaProject and how I love that. So it's got a bunch of little modular shops in this town that you're going to. You're doing stuff like, learning skateboard tricks and renting movies at the video store and going to the arcade and all sorts of very 80s themed stuff.
And the whole vibe of the 80s theme stuff that I mean, having met you, is something very close to your heart.
Yeah, I really have not grown out of that. I'm really I was a teen in the 90s. So the 80s I was barely a teen in the 80s. But I'm kind of reaching a little bit back into that, but I grew up just like loving like Breakfast Club and all the John Hughes movies. And this game really came out of I wanted to make kind of like a John Hughes board game. I don't think it is a John Hughes board game, but that was kind of in the back of my mind when I first started to work on this was I want a game that feels like that can be like soundtracked by the Thompson twins and Devo, and that won't feel out of place. Like that's kind of the vibe I'm trying to get out with it. And that has been kind of the thing that's pushed a lot of the design elements as well. It's just like, okay, I'm gonna do this, but how would it feel to play this with Devo playing in the background?
So a lot of game designers, it seems like there's a bit of a split between is it mechanics first and then you look for a theme? Is it theme first and then you just try and figure out different mechanics that suit the different micro interactions that you're looking for? Or is it like just vibe, overall vibe? Like I want it to feel this way or I want it to look this way. What was your starting point when you were thinking about Last Week of Summer? Was it just John Hughes, 80s? I have a playlist. I'm gonna make a board game to this playlist. Like
Yeah,
how did
it very much was. Yeah, it was very much theme first, and I'm a mix. So I'm not always theme first. I can sometimes be. It's not strictly mechanics. It'll be mechanics with a vibe, or it'll be theme. But this was the well. There is always a seed of a mechanic in there. So it's not just I want to make an 80s board game. It's I want to use this and I want to make an 80s board game, and I think these two would go together. But I think that John Hughes, new wave music thing was really the strongest driving factor when I started this one.
and so when thinking about Last Week of Summer, we've talked about publishing, quite a bit and talking to publishers. How are you thinking of getting this one out there? Do you have a preferred route of launching it? I know you said certain games may be right for taking to publishers versus, are you interested in considering like a Kickstarter? Are you thinking of it in other ways?
Yeah, this one 100% Kickstarter. That is the
Okay,
plan. So
cool.
we're hoping to be able to launch it early next year. So mechanically, we're good. We're done. Right now, it's the point of getting the graphic design where we want it to be.
Yep.
So, but mechanically, we're good, and it's just it's the other stuff, making it beautiful and ready to put on shelves, ready to photograph, all that stuff.
It's yeah, often a very long process. You think that you think that you're done and you're so excited to be done, and then it's like, oh yes, there's this whole other half that we need to do.
Right, and that is the big thing about reaching out to publishers too. Like that push and pull of the two different routes, right? Of when you work with somebody else, they'll take that stuff off of off of your plate. So you just have to worry about, is it mechanically sound? Am I happy with that part of it? And then they'll go run with all of the other stuff, with the art and the design and the shipping and the production and everything else. That when you start really, going this route, you're like, oh boy, this is a lot of stuff. This is a lot of hats I got to wear. Yeah, so there is that real push pull, I think, that people always have to think about.
You said the mechanics are done, and the way that you were like, everything's done, the gameplay's
Yeah,
done.
it's well, when I say done, I yeah, you never mean done, right? It's always, and I think when you get something finished, and I really learned this in publishing as well. It's like, you know what, this, like, I've got to let this go. Like, you can always tweak things forever, and I haven't quite got to that I got to let it go point yet. There's still a few other little things that are gonna just, at this point, it's more the math than it is anything else. It's like, this number could be a little different. This, like, maybe this is a 2, not a 3, that sort of thing. But at some point, you just gotta, let that bird fly and be okay with it, and just be like, that's what this is. Now I got to move on to the next thing.
It's interesting, like in terms of the playtesting kind of phase and getting feedback. I think this is just a really interesting area because it seems like for certain game designers that I've talked to as well, feedback is not great. That's not a great experience for them,
Right.
and they are not fans of feedback. And whereas others are, take the opposite view. That phase of going from 0 to 1, uh, you're looking for different things at different stages of that. Um, and there's probably an initial point is when you're very open-minded. You're wanting all sorts of feedback. You're taking it quite seriously, and you're kind of going to work it through. But at some point, you make a decision to say, okay, so if you're saying this stuff, I'm making a decision not to include that because you're getting into the realm of, so then this is not a game for you, or that this mechanic you just don't like, but versus it doesn't work. So your games are more I'm thinking of it from a tech perspective, feature rich. Your games are a lot more advanced. Maybe advanced is the wrong word, but the games that I make are relatively straightforward. They're relatively simple. There isn't a huge amount of math in the same way. They're definitely like, not balanced and all that kind of stuff. But I don't have several different things that you can do at any one time. So when I'm listening to feedback and someone's like, I don't like this part of it, then for me, that's a relatively straightforward thing to then say, okay, well, do I like that? Do I not like that? And how can I change it? But looking at a game like Last Week of Summer or other, like Euro games in general, I'm always a bit like, ooh, if you want to change something like pretty fundamental, that's tough. Like that's gonna have a lot of knock-on effects. So long-winded way of asking, how do you get from that phase of I'm bringing in everything to slowly starting to say, cool, so this thing is now locked in. I'm happy with it now. Because as you say, it's never done, but it's good enough.
Right.
How do you think about that process?
Yeah, so I think feedback is always. I definitely see this when I'm in playtest groups too. That people deal with it in a lot of different ways. I think I'm lucky or unlucky, I guess, in that I did a lot of work as a journalist when I was younger, and your feedback from editors is not nice. So I've built up, I think, a little bit of a thicker skin because I've gotten some very pointed, very harsh feedback. Because in journalism, you got to get stuff done fast. You got a deadline, and the paper's got to come out tomorrow. So they just let you know, and you got to make those changes. And I think that has helped me a lot. Probably also playing years of hockey. Hockey coaches aren't known for their gentle
They're
touch.
warm and fuzzy.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I've certainly gotten tougher feedback in my life than I've got from board game playtesters. But I think for me, the what I learned early on was the most important feedback I could get was just watching people play the game. It wasn't necessarily what they said at the end. It was just like, you seemed really bored doing this part. You seemed to really gravitate to this part. You seemed scared to engage with this part. And so then it's like asking them afterwards, like, why this, why this, why this, I think has been a lot more useful. Sometimes you get really useful stuff from folks too, when they're just like, oh, you know what, maybe if this, whatever, if this small thing was like this. That is not very specific, but you do get those little tweaks as well, which can be really helpful. But oftentimes the actual feedback is more, people feel like, oh, now I'm expected to say something, so I want to say something, and I'm just gonna, this is the thing that's in my head that I'm gonna tell you, right? So they're a little bit like, that super keener student in your first year university classes who just feels the need to put up their hands for everything. They're doing a little bit of that, and so you kind of, that it's worth something, but it's not worth as much. But I think the key is just observing people, and then seeing them, be bored or be really excited about this one thing, and then be like, okay, cool, I'm going to lean into that. So for last week of summer, that was the arcade. I made some changes to the arcade, and that was one that I was like, is this too, like, I'm not sure if I'm in love with this. And then I made some little tweaks, and people were crazy for it. Like, that was the thing that was bringing joy every time we played the game. So it's like, okay, cool. So we need to, like, what's working there? We need to do more of that. So then I was trying to find the kernel of what was bringing that joy, and then bring that to some of the other locations to make sure that maybe everywhere doesn't have the same experience, but that places are, touching that same nerve as much as I can.
Cool. And so with last week of summer, you're hoping to launch it some point early next year. Are you working on other games at the same time?
Yeah, yes,
Is
too
that a
too much,
problem, the way that you
too
answer
much so.
that?
I was listening to your episode with our mutual friend Judson, and he was saying how much he is like, I focus on one game, and he's told me that too. He's like, Shawn, just focus on this one. Stop it with all the other stuff. Focus on this one game. And I think it's good advice that I do not listen to. So I can't do it. If I want to focus on a project, I need three other things that I'm not doing so that I can do that. Like, I need to be procrastinating from something in order to do something else. And it's just how my brain is built. So I've always got a bunch of different projects that are kind of bouncing around at different stages that I'm thinking about. And the same thing as well, that it's still kind of in my head that maybe I pitch this again, maybe I tweak this a little bit and go that avenue. Or also just following up with last week of summer, right? Like, Jess and I really want to build our own brand. We want to build our own publishing house, and we want to have a bunch of games that we feel very good about. So it's a little bit tricky, because once I get to a game to that point where I'm like, oh, I think a publisher will definitely take this, I also think, well, do I want to give it to them? Can't I just
I
keep
want myself.
this
Yeah.
for myself? Like, I'll do this maybe in 2 years or maybe in 3 years. So yeah, so but to answer your question quickly, very much. I've always got a bunch of things, and I've always got new things as well that, I'm sure you know this too. Like, when you're just walking around, you're like, oh, I can make a game of that. That
Oh
would
my
be
gosh.
cool.
I have a whole lovely board. And then like tons of little notes of oh, you do this, you do that. I just realized that someone I know has access to a specific IP, and that then I was like, oh, by the end of that thought process, I'm like, oh, I think I might have a game for that. So
Oh wow.
like
Is it Tron? I want to make a game about Tron so bad.
no. No, but you should. I mean, it was it Raffensperger is everything to do with Disney now. So
Yeah,
there you
yeah, yeah,
go.
yeah. So they got to
Um,
own. Yeah, I gotta cozy up to them.
there you
Yeah,
go. There
there's
you go.
not enough Tron games out there, man. I love Tron. But yeah, yeah. You really, I've got that with. I'm very analog, so I've got everything in notebooks, which is a nightmare. because I've got 8 exactly identical notebooks that I have no way to know where things are. And I don't write from the first page back. I write on the first page, then I'll just write on the back of the back page, then I'll write halfway in the middle of a page I've already written on, and just expect I'll find that again in the future. It's not the best system, but yeah.
Well, Shawn, thank you so much for taking some time to share your experience and to geek out a little bit about GaiaProject with me today. If anyone out there would like to find out more about Shawn and his upcoming game Last Week of Summer, you can find him on YouTube. His channel, along with Jess, is Allies or Enemies, or by going to alliesorenemies.com. Both links will be in the description below. Shawn, thank you so much for joining me.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. This was really fun. Always great to chat about board games.